Hello and welcome to the video. Today I have two Iyslander decks for you. For the new players I have this very good $130 build. It has a lot of budget cards, a lot of good cards in it, but this deck is pretty much good to go to start winning events at your local armory. And the other one is a fully optimized Iyslander build sitting at the $1,220 mark. There is a huge price difference, but keep in mind the win rate difference between these two decks is, I would say, roughly 5%, so it's not like a huge win rate difference in general. Of course, the fully optimized build has much more potential in it, and a lot of the winning power that makes this deck better is things like the Stormstriders, which is, I believe, a $130 card. So if you have like a $300 budget, you could even get the budget build, also get yourself a Stormstriders, and then you pretty much got yourself a almost fully optimized deck right from the get-go. But I know there are players out there that don't have as much finances and resources available to them, so I have this like bare bones minimum starter Iyslander list right here, and then the fully optimized one with a hefty price tag over here. So what does Iyslander do? Well, Iyslander is a deck that wants to play cards during the opponent's turn. Every time it plays an ice card during the opponent's turn, it will generate a frostbite. A frostbite is basically a token that makes your opponent's activated abilities and cards they play cost an additional resource. So a 1-cost card becomes 2 cost, a 0-cost becomes 1 cost, and this can kind of throw off the flow of the game quite significantly, especially if you combine that with cards like Channel Lake Frigid. This is probably the best card in the game right now, for the ice decks at least, because this one also makes the opponent's activate abilities and cards cost an additional resource. So if you play an ice card like this in your opponent's turn, then you will generate a frostbite, which makes stuff cost 1 more, and then on top of that this will stay on the field, making everything cost an additional. So playing something like this during your opponent's turn pretty much means that they probably are not able to do much in that turn in general, which makes it very easy for you to block out whatever they are doing. And then we also have things like Blizzard, which can take away Go Again. Go Again in Flesh and Blood means that your opponent can play something else after they have played an attack action card, for example, that has Go Again written on it. So this takes the Go Again away unless they pay 2, and then again this is an ice card, so if you play during your opponent's turn it also generates a frostbite. So this basically says pay 3 or your turn ends, and that's just super nasty, very hard for opponents to counter, and very good to play with in general. Then on top of that we have a bunch of blues that we can play during the opponent's turn to poke for a bit of damage here and there. For example, we have the Aether Hill. This one deals 2 damage, it costs 1, and this combos very nicely with the weapon that goes in Iyslander, because imagine you play this during your opponent's turn, you deal 2 damage, you pitch a blue, so you have 2 resources floating. It's an ice action card, so you generate a frostbite. That's already very good, right? Because that makes it harder for your opponent to do much of anything. And then after that you can activate your Waning Moon. This one costs 2 resources, which you can very efficiently pay with your 2 floating resources at that point of time. And this one will deal 3 damage to them as well. So you get into this flow where you try to do a big attack during your turn. For example, a Fyendal Fighting Spirit. This is coming in for 7. And then you put something in your arsenal, you draw up. Your opponent probably already double blocked a card like this, meaning that they only have 2 cards left in hand and potentially an arsenal. And then when they play the first card during their turn, before they can draw up, you do your Aether Hill into your Waning Moon combo, and you're pretty much pushing like 12 damage with something that they can't really interact with, while you still have plenty of cards left in your hand to block with, to stop whatever value they are creating, and you can kind of little by little outvalue your opponent that way and kind of take over the game that way. Of course, in the budget build we don't have cards like Command and Conquer and Eaststrike, because these are very expensive, and we definitely don't have the fabled card, the Heart of Fyendal. This, by the way, is a really good card in the fully optimized build, but you don't really need it as much as you would think you would, because this one has an ability that when you pitch it, you can gain a life if your life is less than your opponent's. It's really good because Iyslander already starts at a lower life total, so this is again something that can leverage the life total differences between both of the decks. So therefore this is in here. It's not necessary to have, but it's a cool little thing to have in general. So if you have one of these, definitely put it in your Iyslander deck, but it's not mandatory. You can pretty much put any blue in here. A good blue that I would suggest to replace this with if you don't have Heart of Fyendal is an Aether Quickening. So you can play an almost optimized build even if you don't have this. So when it comes to comparing these two lists, I have a comparison right there. Let me refresh this quickly so it's fully up to date. And you can see for the most part the deck is roughly the same. I don't have the Command and Conquers and E-Strikes. Instead, in the budget build, I put in an Exude Confidence and a Nourishing Emptiness. If you want to, you can take the Nourishing Emptiness out and instead you can run something like Scar for a Scar, which is a 4 attack with Go Again. Personally, I don't like Scar for a Scar in Iyslander simply because it is only a 4 attack and it blocks for 2, which is a little bit inefficient. However, there are a lot of people that do love it, so if you want to have something even cheaper than what I'm showing on the screen right now, you can always just go for Scar for a Scar instead of the Nourishing Emptiness and you should be more than fine. But for the rest, the deck is pretty much the same. So instead of the Heart of Fyendal, I have that extra copy of Aether Quickening here, and it's just these two attacks have been replaced with Exude Confidence and Nourishing Emptiness because they are just much cheaper options in the deck in general. So why these two choices? Well, Exude Confidence is a really good card in Iyslander because I will read it out to you so you can read along and get an idea what this does. So while Exude Confidence isn't defended by a card with equal or greater power, the defending hero can't play or activate instants or defense reactions this combat chain. That's already really good because this kind of stops them from using defense reactions onto this. And then on top of this, there's an instant ability that says pay 3, it gains 2. This instant ability you can activate as many times as you would like during your turn, so you can very easily just play this and just pump it with like 3 times with a bunch of blues in your hand and then keep your arsenal ready for the next turn, or twice if you want to put 1 card into your arsenal, attacking in for like 8 to 10 damage very easily, which is just really good in general. And I think this is a card that is really underrated in the Blitz format in general. Then on top of that, we have the Snapdragon Scalers in the budget list, which can kind of be used to give the Exude Confidence Go Again. So you can pull off some very cool combos where you play the Exude Confidence, you give it Go Again with the Snapdragon Scalers, or you push it a little bit and then you can follow it up with a big attack like a Nourishing Emptiness, which if you haven't closed the combat chain yet, has Dominate, and that will give you +1 intellect at the end of turn, which means that you can draw an extra card. So there's some very nice combo potential between these two, and I think you will really love playing these instead of the E-Strikes and Command and Conquers. You could even opt in the long run to not even get these and just keep playing these, because it's just such a good combo to have in the early game, especially if you combine the Nourishing Emptiness with something like the Goliath Gauntlet, giving it a +2 power. It becomes almost impossible for your opponent to respond to that properly, and you can set up these really amazing turns and really catch your opponent off guard. It's a bit RNG, because if you have an attack action card in your graveyard, then the Nourishing Emptiness no longer has the Dominate effect and also doesn't have the on-hit effect, but that is just what it is. Like in Blitz, you either win early or you lose early, so therefore I do think it's a very good card to have in Blitz. So when it comes to the legendaries, there are a lot of legendaries that are in the Iyslander deck that personally I don't think are very necessary. One of the biggest examples that I hear a lot of people talking about is like, I don't have a Fyendal Spring Tunic. Yeah, it's true, the Fyendal Spring Tunic is a very good card. You get a counter on it every turn, and then at instant speed you can remove 3 energy counters to gain a resource. But in the Blitz format, the games end very fast. fast. To be able to get 2 times the 1 resource out of this is almost impossible, and therefore I think the Spellfire Cloak is a perfect alternative in Blitz, because this one gains you a resource at any given time. The upside of the Spellfire Cloak is that you can gain that resource as early as turn 1, while the Fyendal Spring Tunic you need to wait 3 turns, so there's definitely an upside to playing this 1 cent, 2 cents budget alternative, even in the optimized build, because there are a lot of matchups where this is just a better card in general. But so the Spellfire Cloak is a perfect alternative for that. Then we have the Crown of Providence. Like this one, it blocks 2 and it lets you cycle a card out of your arsenal or your hand to draw a card. This is really good for hand fixing, but the Iyslander deck is kind of consistent already, and for the most part people just play this for 1 to 2 block and to have a little bit more consistency in the super fast matchups, mostly the ultra aggro matchups. But on the other hand, the Coronet Peak, it also blocks 2, and it has this very cool activated ability that forces them to discard a card. So I think if you have the Coronet Peak, you're pretty much set to go against pretty much any matchup. But I do suggest getting at least 1 legendary equipment that has a 2 block value. So either the Coronet Peak, or you can get yourself the Crown of Providence. If you have a little bit of more money, you can probably get yourself the Crown of Providence instead. But I think for the budget build, the Coronet Peak is just so good, and there's so many matchups where the discard of pay 1 really matters. So I think getting just this 1 legendary, which is kind of cheap right now, I think it's sitting around the $40 mark. It's just a very good card to have in general. The Alluvian Constellas, this is a very niche legendary. It is very good against the wizard matchup because you have the Arcane Barrier 1, which lets you, like, whenever you prevent arcane damage during each turn, you can put a energy counter on this. It can have up to 4 energy counters on here, and then instant speed, you can remove 2 counters, gain 3 resources that you can use to activate your stuff, which is really good to get some free Waning Moon activations during your opponent's turn. I don't think it's necessary to have this card. It's really niche. Like sometimes you even want to have the the Spellfire Cloak instead, even against the wizard matchup, because the games are so fast, especially against games like Kano, that it becomes a bit awkward to have this. You just don't have the time to wait for this to get all its resources against those really heavy wizard aggro decks. So I think only against the Iyslander mirror matchup you really want to be using this, and other than that there's not really much of a point of having this. You could probably even skip this early on. And then what else do we have? I had the Storm Striders. Like this is probably the only piece in here that I feel like if you want to upgrade this deck, get yourself some Storm Striders. Like if you have the budget list, get the Storm Striders, because this card is absolutely amazing. What does it do? At instant speed, you can pay 1, you can destroy the Storm Striders, and then you may play your next wizard non-attack action card this turn as though it were an instant. And you may wonder to yourself, like, why does that matter? Like, why would I want to play that as an instant? Well, the key ingredient that makes this so good is that you can wait in your opponent's turn until they have played all the cards. Let's say they only have 1 card left in hand, and that's it. That you can crack your Storm Striders, and then you can follow that up with a big attack, something like an Ice Bolt, which will deal 5 damage. You can play something from your arsenal like a Quickening, which will deal an additional 2 damage, and then after that you can activate your Staff as well, dealing an additional 3 damage. So you can kind of out of nowhere just explode on your opponent with this complete barrage of damage and just close out the game quickly. And that's what makes the Storm Striders so good, especially in decks like Kano, where they have even higher damage potentials available to them. But even in Iyslander, it's just such a good card to close out the game in the late game. When you get your opponent to that like 6 to 8 life total left, you just crack your Storm Striders and you just go all in with this huge barrage of damage. And therefore I think this is definitely the #1 card you want to buy if you're going to be upgrading this deck. So this is card #1 that you should really get as soon as possible. Card #2, if you're upgrading, let's see. So if you have the Storm Striders, which card would I buy next? That's a bit of a tough one, but I think if I had to buy something next, it would probably be the Fyendal Spring Tunic, simply because it has a bit of, it has a lot of decks where this goes into it. Generic, there's a lot of decks that can really utilize a Fyendal Spring Tunic very well, so it's definitely a good upgrade to have in general. It's expensive, but it's a good long-term purchase that you will get a lot of fun out of, that you will be able to use in a lot of decks. So I think this is definitely card number 2 that you want as an upgrade. Card number 3, obviously the Coronet Providence. Being able to fix your hand is very good against a bunch of matchups, so having a Coronet Providence is very good. And then after that, I think the Alluvian Constellation is probably one of the last cards you should upgrade, because it just has too much of a niche use. Like if you have a lot of Icelanders in your local meta, then definitely get this over a Fyendal Spring Tunic first. But then after that you can probably go for the E-Strikes first, which are $25 cards if I'm not mistaken. These also go in a lot of different decks, so you can have a lot of fun with these. And then the last card you want to upgrade is probably the Command and Conquer and the Heart of Fyendal, and then your deck should be pretty much good to go, ready to go for these big events. And then you also have everything available to you in case you want to play Iyslander in the CC format, which I will do a update video for soon, because the CC Iyslander looks a little bit different than the Blitz list. But for the most part, if you have all these cards already, then you just need a couple of upgrades to be able to play Iyslander at its full power in CC as well. So that's pretty much my take on budget Iyslander versus the fully upgraded Iyslander. Let's go down the list one more time. The lists are pretty much the same, which is good for you, because if you start upgrading, your deck doesn't start to function differently. It's pretty much has all to do with a bit of value, equipment here and there, and trying to get your Storm Striders as soon as possible, because these are just extremely good to have. Anyways, that's all from me for today. I will put the link to both of these decks down in the description, so if you want to check them out, you will be able to copy and adjust stuff. Generally speaking, I update my decks over on my Patreon. I have a lot of fully optimized decks as well as budget decks available on my Patreon, so for the most part I tend to update them there. But what I tend to do is I tend to update my decks in the same link as the same like February link as I had previously. So if I do push changes into this deck, you can probably see those even if this video is already a bit older. You just click on the link and you see what I changed there, and you can pretty much run that. I will make sure to upgrade them regularly until I of course post a new video with some new links and stuff like that. Anyways, I hope you have a lot of fun with Iyslander. It's a really good deck to play in Blitz, and it is a bit of a difficult deck. It is definitely a deck that requires a bit of meta knowledge, so don't get too discouraged if in the beginning things aren't really working out as how you want them to be. But just keep this important rule in mind. With Iyslander, you always want to have a card left in your hand to put in your arsenal, which is usually a blue card. That's lesson number 1. And lesson number 2 is that you want to tax your opponent at breaking points that are awkward for them. For example, if they have 2 resources left in the pitch zone, you want to play things like your Blizzard to force them to pay that 2 and then pitch another card. Like, you really want to create these really awkward breaking points for them, that they need to spend more cards than they normally would in order to play out their cards or to activate a weapon or equipment, etc, etc. So that's how you play Iyslander, and if you want me to do a full-on gameplay guide, feel free to let me know down in the comments. I will definitely look into that. And of course, I do offer coaching sessions on my Patreon. If you really don't know what to do, you can always check those out, and we can set up an appointment where I go over all the basics, play a couple of different decks against you, so you can get a bit of a feel how to play this deck against a wide range of meta decks out there. Anyways, this was Kugane. Thank you for watching, and I will see you all next time with the next video. Take care.